So in today's episode, we're going to have a look at the Fujinon S 100mm f3.5 lens that is used on the Fuji 690. This particular model is the G690 BL, or the BLP as some people will refer to as well. So there's a bit of fogging in the lenses. There's also a little bit of stiffness to the focusing. And while we're at it, we might just take the entire shutter system out and clean it out and have it resurfaced, since we're just gonna dive into the whole thing altogether. There is a little bit of a crunch as well when I operate the aperture ring, so we're gonna see if there's any kind of particles that's kind of getting it to be a bit stiff as well. So yeah, we're gonna go through step by step. So first things first, and we're just gonna take the front. We're gonna use the piece of rubber cones, apply a little bit of pressure, and that should screw it off. Alright, now that the front plate is off, this will allow us to see the inside mechanism. And since this lens operates as its shutter, as well as focusing and setting up the aperture, you're going to see everything is inside for the mechanics part. I'm just going to take this glass off. We do that with the use of the spanner. And like usual, once I unscrew it, or at least get it loose, I just unscrew it by hand after that. Alright, so we're just gonna put this on the side for now. Alright, so we're gonna grab this spanner and just get in this retaining ring. Next, I'm gonna take those 3 screws that are at the base, that rings. So I'm just gonna take across, just be mindful before you place your screws. And this one just unscrews off, so you can tell the dirt and grime that's in that. Take the focusing ring out, There's going to be 3 screws. I believe it's 3 screws that needs to be removed. Again, being mindful of where you put your screws and parts so you don't lose them. Once we have all these 3 screws off, take the focusing ring, twist it as far as you can, and then lift it out. Make sure you use the right size for your screws so you don't risk stripping them. These particular grommets don't seem to come out all the way. They stop at a specific distance. So we can, and this tiny one here, there's 2 cross screws on the bottom, and I'm just going to remove those 2. And then there's one more grommet that's in this lower part as well. Sometimes if you notice there's some Loctite or some kind of resin that they use to lock the screws in, I use a little bit of isopropyl. You can also use acetone. Just little drops to kind of help to get to those screws. Sometimes when these grommets are giving you a hard time, just take your time. Don't rush through it. Eventually you'll get it out. Just make sure that your tools are grabbing onto the slots without stripping them. Alright, next we're just going to try to attempt to remove the shutter system. We're just going to pull those tabs away from the pegs. That should loosen this up. We have to make sure that we don't rip the connections. So here's just a little tab that holds this together. And I'm just going to grab my soldering iron, just going to melt the soldering that's here, and that should disconnect the lens. I'm going to melt the old. There we go. And as for the black wire, there's a piece of rubber that goes over the soldered area, and that's where we're just gonna remove. There we go. As for the base that the lens sits in, that just pops out. Alright, taking into consideration that there's a few of these brass washers on them. It just sits here. Just gonna make sure that all this stays together. There's this tab that connects to these two slots that we removed earlier. We're just gonna pull that out. Cock your shutter to remove the spring. And this way this allows it to twist, maneuver, and to take it out. There are two grommets on this side, that we are going to remove as well. This should get the bottom part to slip off. And here you have the bottom part. So we got the brass washer. All right. And just to be on the safe side with this, I'm just going to mark it. Let's see here. Just going to etch it on these two edges here. That should get this part off. And then the big brass washer. And that leaves us with the helicoid. So I'm just going to mark it. Right here, knowing that if I need that's where it's going to have to be. all you have to do is unscrew this. And again, I'm just trying to I'm just going to mark this to be aligned with the flash. So that will be the entry point. And you can see all the grease that needs to be cleaned off. The grommets were on this side. I was able to access it from within and just slightly push them out as they are stuck with, again, that Loctite some kind of a Loctite resin, which kind of helps it keep in place. So I'm just gonna nudge it off. Now, one thing to be cautious about is there's a ball bearing inside where the aperture ring is. So when you do start having the gaps in space, there's going to be an opening for this ball bearing to come out. So make sure that you do keep that in mind. Take the top half of the helicoid, you just pop it out, and then it's going to stay aside. So the black wire can be pulled off using a plier, preferably one with a soft flat edge, or the inside. You can put rubber so you can actually protect the thing you're trying to remove. And I'm just going to remove this little peg. There we go. And that should allow us to remove this. Just be mindful of the red wire. It will be a bit tricky, but just be patient. And you should be able to get it off. There we go. So I finally have this part of the ring removed. And then there's a screw that fits for the aperture. And you can see where that bearing sits. There is a spring on that, so also I'm going to remove that so we don't lose it. And then we're just going to remove this long screw here, and that will allow us to take the aperture ring out. Finally, there's another screw here. So I'm just going to take this brass spring out, and now that removes the speed ring, and we're left with this. So altogether, we have finally disassembled the entire body, minus the shutter system.